Hey everybody, excited to let you know we're dropping a new podcast with Meredith Guerrero. We recorded this over Christmas break. Meredith was here visiting her sister and brother-in-law, good friends of ours, and we were having a chat over Christmas break, and I was like, hey, would you be interested in recording a podcast with me? And sure enough, 2 days later, we were at the office doing so. So I'm excited for you to hear this because Meredith's got a very intriguing background. Got her start at Bain, then really wanted to go the designer fashion route, and now she's working with, she finds herself working with a ton of scientists in the research field, doing some really cool stuff to try to really change the outcomes of Americans health-wise and the world health-wise. And she explores all of that with us. We have a really fun conversation. She shares kind of her decision-making process along the way and how really she never envisioned being in this role, but how it's a perfect suit for her skill set and how much she loves it every day. At the end, we end up talking about kind of riffing on some health stuff that's pretty fun and interesting from my perspective. So I really hope you enjoy the podcast. She was a blast to talk to, and I hope you check it out. Without further ado, Meredith Guerrero, thank you for coming on Beers and Careers.
Welcome. Thank you. Oh, I welcomed you to your show.
No, it's fine. This is one of the most impromptu podcasts. That's so much fun, by the way. Meredith is in town and is the sister of my best friend's wife.
Correct.
Okay. That was like a lot right there on a Friday at 3 o'clock. But we were we got to hang out on Christmas. We were hanging out, having some good conversations. I was like, let's come on a podcast. Let's do this while you're here in town from Colorado.
It's good enough to record.
Thank you for driving the 20 minutes up to Marlboro.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Do you want to start maybe with, other than the fact that you're currently living in Colorado, kind of what you do today and who you are, and then I'll ask some rapid fires and we'll jump right in?
Sure.
Cool.
I have said that if to give my elevator pitch, I need a 100-story building. So cut me off or give me the sign to keep going if I'm just going off on a tangent. But today I'm the CEO of the Colorado Longitudinal Study. If you live in Colorado, it's Colorado. If you live here, it's Colorado.
Okay. Rado.
Colorado. And we are a longitudinal cohort study. That means that we are getting volunteer participants to give a blood sample and answer survey questions about their health and their family health once a year for a decade or longer. And we're collecting and storing that blood in such a way that all different kinds of researchers can use it to study lots of different kinds of conditions and diseases and health trajectories. And as we all age, some people will stay very healthy, some will get sick, and we'll be able to look back into those blood samples and see the earliest biomarkers of disease, which you can't do today because people don't go to the doctor until they're symptomatic, until they already are sick. So thinking this proactively with a large population, we're not looking for people who are at a high risk, is not really been done before, and that's also why we're a nonprofit, because it's not a moneymaker.
Right.
It's very really cool, just trying to capture current states of health in a really powerful way.
To be predictive, you need large sample sizes.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. What a cool. I was enamored when I heard about you telling me about it, because it makes so much sense from my perspective of like you need some sort of baseline to start making hypothesis.
Totally.
Or hypotheses. How does a woman with a psychology degree and then an integrated marketing degree know so much about lipids now?
Do I sound like I know what I'm talking about?
You do. You nailed it. Like when I was talking to you and you were talking about lipids, I was like, you're like, cholesterol's a lipid. I was like, that's more my speed. So.
Okay. Well, I actually co-founded Kohl's with two biologists, a neuroendocrinologist and a geneticist who went on to study proteins.
Okay.
So this was certainly not my brainchild. I didn't know that this need existed. It was Larry Gold who sort of was the visionary of this. And he has spent 60 years studying proteins that change in the blood over time. And proteins are a much more fragile molecule than DNA. So there are lots of biobanks out there, even the UK Biobank that started in 2000. And they were really convinced that studying DNA would answer all the questions that we had about health and disease. But back then, when they thought DNA was all you needed, they would take blood from somebody and they would leave it on the lab bench until the end of the day, and then they'd process all of the samples together. But that means that some samples were being processed within 20 minutes and some were being processed within 9 hours. And the amount of variation, that didn't matter for DNA, but proteins start to degrade when they've been out of the body for 30 minutes.
Oh, wow.
So we actually have to have a protocol where the phlebotomist draws the blood, takes it into a wet lab, puts it in the centrifuge, and gets it into the freezer within 30 minutes.
Whoa.
So there are very few studies that are not intentionally studying one specific protein or one specific pathway that have a protocol that's that
Rigorous, yeah.
Wow. And I
that's
still didn't
really-
answer your question, actually.
No, we'll get into it. I'm not going to let you off the hook on that, but that's really interesting. As someone who just understands like protein from like the basic, like I know I need to get my protein in. So like it's like
Things are
would hear you
different.
describe it as fragile is interesting, I guess.
Yeah.
I would have never predicted that, but
Well, and proteins, as in like the large muscles, the meat that we eat is different than the protein molecules that are in our circulating blood.
okay.
Please don't ask me
No,
to
I
explain
won't.
why
I won't.
how they're
I won't.
different.
Dude, that's insane. Now I'm like, what am I taking after the gym?
Yeah, all the supplements. Larry likes to say all the supplements you take just make really expensive pee.
I know, my doctor just says that. It's like, I don't know. Sometimes I need the placebo. But before we get into you getting your psych degree and then your master's in marketing, so people can get to know you. First off, this will be on video, but we are drinking out of moose cups, like straight out of Christmas Vacation, which is unbelievable. And we're drinking a White Russian from Left Hand Brewery in
Cheers.
Colorado.
Nice.
But real quick, people get to know you. What is your favorite drink since we're on beers and careers?
I think I gave you 3.
Yes.
For beer, everybody in Colorado likes IPAs, but I really don't like the bitter. So
Amen.
I love Avery. They do really great stouts.
Okay.
So Tweak is a 13.1% alcohol stout that I love. And this is another one. This is from Left Hand. And then, let's see. I went to Sonoma a couple years ago and went to a really cute winery called St. Francis. And so I've been lucky to find their wines in the grocery store in Colorado.
wow.
So I've been drinking their Old
That's cool.
Vines Zin. Yeah, it's nice. You
That's really
literally
cool.
you see the little, the
Yeah.
tower on the picture, the label, and you're like, oh, I went there. And I've been drinking a lot of bubbles lately. So I've been doing. I don't like expensive stuff for myself if
Yeah.
it's me drinking alone.
Yeah.
But Shandong, I think, is about, it's not Moet.
Yeah.
It's not
It's right, kind of mid.
tons,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's a little better than Prosecco.
I get it. I've been, when you sent that, I was thinking about it. I have a sparkling rosé at home, which is like, some of my friends are not happy to hear that I say that, but it's delicious. Do you have a favorite curse word?
I do. Honestly, I wanted to be more creative, so I looked up curse words, but the reality is, fuck.
Yeah.
It's my go-to.
I think we're over 85% now.
Okay.
So
It
you're
can
in
be
good company.
positive, it can be negative, it can be enthusiastic.
It's
it can
so
be-
versatile.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
so versatile. Are you a quote person?
Yes,
Oh, cool.
I'm a sucker for quotes.
Love that. Do you have any favorite ones or
I
one
do.
favorite
I
one you wanna share?
I couldn't remember it, so I screenshotted it. And this is honestly one that like sometimes makes my voice quiver, but I love it so much. It's from Martin Luther King Jr. It says, "If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving." And that, especially in sort of my startup mentality that I've been in as we started this nonprofit, I took that quote and I posted it on our whiteboard. It's like it doesn't matter that we can't fly yet. We know we're going to.
Right.
But we're crawling right now, and that's just the reality. of it.
Progress.
Yeah.
Progress.
We're making progress.
Especially when you, I'm guessing in the scenario you're in, there's a lot of excitement, but at the same time, it feels like you've got the world against you in terms of time and the other things that come with running a business.
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, there are many days that I don't know what I'm doing and just doing the best that I can.
Right.
And sometimes it's nice to look back and be like, oh wow, my best has been good enough. But in the moment, it doesn't always feel that way.
I love that. My best has been good enough. I think is a wonderful thing already to take from this. Now, what was your first job? And no, anything, like first paying job.
Oh, okay. I walked to my parents' office. My parents owned a small contracting company together, and when I must have been like 14, we used to walk there and stuff envelopes. I was so determined to make money when I was little. I was like very entrepreneurial. My friend and I made Fimo jewelry, and literally we had business cards. We sold it out of we would set up a lemonade stand, and then people would come in and we would sell jewelry to women. And, the most expensive piece was $5, and we just couldn't believe it. But in undergrad, I had 2 amazing internships where I did event planning it was basically fundraising for nonprofits. And I did one of those in Boston with the Castle Group. I'm not sure it even exists today.
Okay.
But then I got to go abroad, and I did it in London with a very prominent charity that supports kids' cancer research.
Wow.
So I enjoyed that. The logistics of planning events is something that I enjoy, and then knowing that I was actually doing some good in the world felt really good.
Yeah.
But still, graduating with a degree in English and psychology, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life.
Right.
So I ended up working for a management consulting firm.
Right out of school.
Right out of school. And I was an assistant, so I wasn't a consultant.
Yep.
But I worked for an incredible company, Bain and Company.
I've heard of them.
Little guy.
Yeah.
But their headquarters is here in Boston.
They are.
They have an amazing corporate culture. And I think regardless of what your position is, if you're curious and you're interested, you can absorb things from wherever you are. So I supported managers and then partners that were in a lot of different industries, and was able to be exposed to finance and healthcare and retail and consumer product goods and all of that.
Yeah.
And it really did give me an insight into the types of careers I might want.
Yeah, you got like a bird's eye view of many different industries. Well,
Exactly.
not just a bird's eye view. You got to hear some
You
rubber meeting the road, kind of.
Totally. And actually, to be honest, there were a lot of consultants that were very intimidated by the senior partners and the hierarchy that they felt was very different than what I felt, because I was literally like, hey, your kid's sick today. Are you going to go pick him up from school? Like, you really get to know senior executives as people.
Yes.
And that helped me a lot, just to level the playing field. Because now, I literally email with Nobel laureate scientists on a fairly regular basis. And I'm just like, hey, nice to see you, Tom. Hope you're doing well.
Right, exactly, right? It's like that person puts their shoes on one at a time, too.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's, that's a hard thing, though. That's a hard thing. I feel like the getting over the intimidation factor. I don't know, for us in sports, we always called it helmet shock. It was like when you were playing a team that was like famous. And they had a cool like album that
the intimidation
had notoriety. It was like helmet shock, and my coach always used to say, so they put their cleats on one at a time too. It's like which is the truth. Yeah. Definitely translates into the business world. Titles freak people out.
Totally, it's not necessary.
Not at all. Not at all. And it is I think also like this podcast was designed for people either searching to figure out what they wanted to do or get inspired by other people's stories. And I think that's a wonderful takeaway, is like, as you're searching for a job, like ask people. And I would find that most people, and honestly, I think the higher up you go from an org chart standpoint, are more willing to help because someone helped them get there. So I think, if this can be the nudge to push you over the end, click send on that email that you want to send.
Totally. I totally agree. And honestly, it's like you impressing somebody with your work skills is one thing that might happen, good for you, but it's probably something like your shared love of a good nitro beer or golf or a sports team. Like, there are ways that you can connect with people at any level that humanize you both and sort of supersede business.
It's the truth. The relationship really matters at the end of the day. I do want to hear about your pivot out of Bain, but how long were you in London?
6 months.
Cool. So you're in undergrad for that?
Yes, I was a junior.
Awesome. So study abroad.
I would have loved to have lived there, but I was living in South Kensington. I was living like...
Help me. I don't know London. I'm sorry. Just like
near the Regent Gardens, Regent Parks, where the Buckingham Palace was, that kind of thing, like near Harrods.
Okay. All
like,
right.
There was some oil tycoon who had like a 38 1,000,000-pound penthouse like across the street from where we were staying.
Whoa.
And I was in a dorm where 9 girls were sharing one bathroom. So we were not living like that, but
you were right
but
there.
Geographically,
Cities.
it was fantastic.
Cool.
So I realized that if I were to move there, I would not have that type of experience.
Yes.
So
You wouldn't move
I
to
came
Midtown
home.
Manhattan in the beginning.
Well, no, but then when I lived in New York, I lived in Manhattan.
Hey.
I just location.
It is the truth. That's so cool. Did you draw on studying abroad? Definitely do it. I'm guessing would be your advice based on the way you just said that.
Yes.
Yeah.
1,000,000%.
Yeah.
I had a cousin who did like semester at sea. He got an amazing experience from that. It hadn't even occurred to me. I think you went to Australia. Is that right?
I did a year and a half in Australia after college.
I would have loved to have done that.
It was cool.
But for me, it was really, I needed to go somewhere English speaking because I'm not great with languages.
Mm-hmm.
But there's still a huge amount of the world out there that is accessible to.
And it's wild how much you can underestimate the cultural differences of an English speaking country. It's like not the same place.
True.
I mean, although you could say that about Colorado and Boston. But yeah, it's true. I've always found too that it was you learned a lot about cultures, you learned a lot about people, but I think it puts you in such an uncomfortable environment maybe that it just forces you to learn about yourself.
Absolutely.
Just half the battle. So no, that's really cool. So how did you get after Bain? You're going after the marketing route here.
Mm-hmm. So
You got your degree in marketing.
I did. I left Boston, a city with a lot of great schools, to move to New York for school.
You did.
So I was working at Bain. We had incubated a hedge fund, and I was able to transition with that team, and that was closing down at the same time as my dad got sick.
Okay.
So my dad was diagnosed with cancer, and as much as I loved the people that I worked with at Bain and loved the culture, I didn't feel like I had a very strong social purpose in what I was doing. So clearly I decided to go get a marketing degree.
Right.
So my rationale there had been when I got my psychology degree in undergrad, my favorite was social psychology. I love using data to understand people. And people aren't rational, but the data can show how people behave emotionally. Correct. And, a lot of it was unfortunately from like consumer product goods companies. It's like, put something on the 3rd shelf instead of the 2nd shelf and make sure that it's red and make sure that there's a kid that's smiling on it. And that was sort of this manipulation that I didn't love, but I loved how you could test and figure things out about people's behavior. And when I went back to school, it was 2010, and social media was sort of still this newly evolving thing. And I think the song "United Hates Guitars" had just come out or something.
Oh, no.
There was this YouTube song where a passenger who was a musician had checked his luggage, his guitar under the plane, and it just got annihilated. And so he ended up making a YouTube song that was like, and it might not have even been United, so maybe it's not a great example, but it was like United Hates Guitars. It was literally him broadcasting a testimonial about how much he hated United. So I felt like social media had given consumers a voice that they didn't have when I was in school in the early 2000s. So I was actually excited about marketing and learning what customers wanted and having a dialogue. And so I moved to New York, and this again in the backdrop of my dad being sick and trying to find something that I was passionate about. So I ended up interning at Prada. I interned at Ann Taylor. I was offered, I would say, the dream job at Prada when my boss had gotten sick and needed to take a sabbatical or leave. I basically got offered the interim possession of senior marketing, I don't know, mucky muck.
Yeah.
And I turned it down. I was basically like, that is proof to me that I shouldn't be here in New York. Like, that was not going to make me happy. I could just tell. I had experienced, I had been very, wide-eyed and hopeful when I got to New York, and my experience was that, no, retail companies still weren't listening to consumers. They don't really care.
Oh, interesting. So why you said no to the job was because you felt like even if you brought data to the table, Prada was not going to change their strategy?
Yeah. Well, and Prada is a family-owned company. I mean, which I didn't know, but like, you know,
Me neither. I didn't know.
LVMH, a lot of the fancy brands have all sort of become part of conglomerates, but Prada, I actually don't know if it is still today, but when I was in school in 2012, 2011, it was owned by Mauricio Prada, or the family. So literally all the strategy was developed in Milan, and then the U.S. offices were just sort of, you know, execution. There wasn't a lot of strategy there.
Wow. All right. Yeah, that's interesting. So did that put a sour taste in your mouth for all retail?
It did. And
Okay.
so I went to Ann Taylor. Ann Taylor, the CEO at the time, had come from one of Bain's primary competitors, so they were using a lot of data.
Okay.
But there, I think, honestly, I shouldn't be bad-mouthing, but the people were just really catty. It was sort of what you would envision, you know, New York people being like size 2 people always doing juice cleanses and being unhappy. I was like, that's not for me.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. So it was really, yeah. So it was also, I don't want to say a toxic environment,
No, but culturally,
but
it
not
wasn't-
not where you were looking for by
Yeah.
any stretch of the imagination.
Exactly.
So what do you do from there?
My mother had gone to high school in Boulder, Colorado.
Yes.
And so my grandparents had lived there. And by this point, when I finished my graduate degree, I think you know my family history a little bit. Both of my parents had passed away. I didn't want to move back to Boston as much as I wanted to stay close to my sister.
Yeah.
I knew I didn't want to stay in New York.
Yeah.
So I basically just
Time
packed
to
up
bail
a
on the East
U-Haul and
Coast.
and moved myself to Colorado.
Kind of to give yourself healthy distance, start anew kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it was very personal based.
Very.
Yeah. Good for you. So that, I mean, I just think that's an important move where it's like sometimes you look at people's careers and you could sit there on your LinkedIn and be like, oh, then she left and went to Deco Accessories because she probably got a sick offer. And it's like, well, no, she was taking care of herself.
Yeah, exactly. I do think I have had a decent compass, sort of moral compass, but also just compass about what's important and what in my life I choose to measure and aspire to, and happiness and contentment is a big part of that.
How has that North Star, if you will, I heard you just say self-awareness. That's kind of what I heard.
North Star is Bain's.
But is
whole
it
thing,
is it
True
there?
North, yeah.
True North Star. How has that changed since, like, for you, from like you being in New York City to like present day, Meredith? Like, what changed in terms of like what makes you happy at the end of the day?
I don't necessarily think that the things that make me happy have changed, but
Okay.
my trust, my faith in myself, my listening to my own needs. I can make those, I can feel it and identify it and address it more quickly. Whereas, you know, in my move to New York, I think was very much sort of I was taking care of myself. I mean, I was moving away from my family while my dad was sick, but I think a big part of that was like, I'm not going to be the person taking care of my whole family. That's not my responsibility as a young 20-something.
Yes.
And then moving to Colorado was acknowledging basically that, hey, I did this thing that looks really cool on paper, and that everyone thinks is going to make you happy, and it didn't. And so, like, what really will make me happy?
Right.
And so, you know, I've been in Colorado for 13 years, going on 13 years, and you know, I've made little moves, but like I know I'm in the right place.
Awesome. That's a hard thing to find.
Oh, I never felt homesick when I lived on the East Coast. I felt a little homesick for London when I left London, but like now, not to mention this dreary weather doesn't help.
You
But
hit it at the worst time. I mean, you're from here. You get it.
I know
but
it
it's
is.
gotten worse.
yes, and Colorado is 300 sunny days a year,
is.
and it's dry, and yeah, so.
You're really rubbing it in around the holidays here.
Sorry.
No, it is the truth. I was always shocked. I've been to Colorado a few times. I also couldn't get over how all the people are fit. It's like it's like
I think it attracts those people.
I do. I also think because of the weather and because of the culture. They're outside a lot.
Absolutely.
But I remember, I don't know, I was talking to my mom or something. The first time I went, I played at the Vail lacrosse tournament. I remember calling my mom. She was like, "How is it?" And I was like, I haven't seen an overweight person since I got out of Denver airport. I was like, wow.
I bet like being at that high altitude probably does burn a few more calories a day.
It's got to, right? It's an impressive thing. America could probably learn a little bit more from that state. So then you're there now you're doing marketing, but you didn't spend a whole lot of time at that. You spent 2 years there at your first stop at Deco.
Yes, that was a startup.
Okay. So you just entrepreneurial all the way.
Totally. I mean, that was really me consulting. I did consulting.
That's your
work.
company?
No,
Okay.
sorry. That's a woman started a company out of her garage, and I believed in what she was doing. I liked it. She had a vision for an e-commerce website that basically barely existed.
Okay.
So she had this interesting product where you could hang curtains with every single element of the curtain was customizable. So the color of the, oh God, I don't even know the words anymore. The knob, the color of the thing that you hang over the curtain rod,
the metal
everything.
rings, all
exactly. And she had done the research to make the knobs powder coated and like they were very high quality. And she wanted you to be able to on the website switch out every element and every color and compare them before you place an order.
Wow.
And that really wasn't a thing in 2011.
No.
So that was a really fun e-commerce project. But I was working part-time and I was sort of giving myself the rest that I needed at the same time.
I was gonna say, how'd you meet her?
Oh my gosh. I had a family friend, who was closing her store. She had like a bed and bath store. And so I went to help her, and the woman who owned Deco went to help, and we were just sort of shooting the shit. And she was talking about how she wanted this website, and I was talking about how I had just gotten this fancy degree at NYU. And so it felt pretty serendipitous.
Wow. Wild.
Yeah.
Very cool.
I can't network like in quotes. I hate it. Like I'd need 6 of these drinks to network.
Yeah.
But I mean, at Christmas it's like I love talking to people about new things. Teach me something.
Yes.
And that approach I think has led me to better opportunities than sort of the schmoozy.
There are different ways to network than just showing up at a cocktail hour. Yeah. With everyone give their business cards. Yeah. Although I will say I hated it, by the way. I hate that networking.
But you're good at it, I'm sure.
I did it. I got better at it. I sucked at it in the beginning. I really sucked at it. And I did get better at it, and it the worst part about it is it's always for business, it's at like 7 a.m. and 6 p.m. It's like the 2 times a day I'm the worst. I'm either really hyper-focused and don't want to talk to anyone, or like I'm tired and creative and don't want to talk to anyone. So, but it made it work. Good testing.
I'm tall. I think we're about the same height probably, but like I just feel like I just like lumber over people and awkwardly hover until there's a moment to be like, oh, I was eavesdropping on your conversation and I agree.
Hi, by the way, I'm Meredith. Yeah, no, it is awkward. It's wild how those places, by the way, have their own cultures where it's okay to interrupt people.
I guess you're right.
It's weird though.
That was something company should like teach people how to network, because I would be all over that.
You'd be all over it. I would argue that you have all the skills to do it. If I walked in a room with you, I was like, just fucking go. You would go. It's just sometimes people need to, like I had that. I had a boss who was like, would go with me and be like, you know what you're doing. Just go talk to that person. Okay.
I'll keep you on my shoulder then when I'm in the
hey, your best is good enough. Your best is good enough. And then I see you went to Gold Lab Foundation. You mentioned Larry Gold.
Yes.
Tell us about that, because this has been really the last good bit for you. Decade, yeah. 10 years,
Yeah, so Larry Gold, the same visionary who came up with the vision for the Colorado Longitudinal Study, he had been a department chair at the Molecular, Cellular, and Developmental Biology Department at CU Boulder, so the University of Colorado Boulder.
Mm-hmm.
And
place.
Gorgeous campus.
Beautiful place.
And Larry had patented a few things that basically were continuing to create royalties for the university, and his lab continued to get piece of that for quite a while. So he had a few $1 million in an account that he couldn't really touch for anything other than sort of university-related activities. So in 2010, he started running an annual conference where he basically invited his friends to come and speak, and he would learn from them, and then he'd have these big fancy dinners.
That's awesome.
Right? So 2010 is the only year I didn't go.
Okay.
I went as a guest in 2011 and 12 and 13, and then in 2014, Larry and I were talking, and he said, I want to turn this into something a little bigger. I want to make this something that's sort of self-sustaining.
Whoa.
And so he and I think they had already set up a nonprofit, but it was called Friends of the Gold Lab Foundation. And so, or the Friends of the Gold Lab Symposium, something like that.
Okay.
So we changed the name, and I took over as the executive director of that. And basically, we kept a lot of it the same because Larry's just he's a very interesting mentor. I've learned so much from him about just like what we were talking about earlier, not being afraid to ask, not being afraid to introduce yourself to fancy people,
right?
Not being afraid to ask stupid questions. Larry will read, he reads prolifically, but he will be, he'll send me emails at 5 a.m. being like, I just read this amazing article in the New Yorker and we have to get this guy. And so I keep a list going every year of people that he wants to invite to the symposium. We end up having 16 speakers over the course of 2 days.
Wow.
We've recorded all of them every year, but now we've started live streaming since the pandemic. So we usually have about 400 people in the audience live, and then about 1,000 people have started attending virtually. Actually, my sister said you would be somebody who would be interested in the kind of stuff that we talk about there.
What is it?
It's a lot of scientists. It's a lot. So Larry's premise for the Gold Lab Symposium was that if the general audience knew more biology and life sciences, that healthcare would get better.
That makes so much sense.
It does. I think it's a little optimistic because there's so much crap in the healthcare system. But he really wants really smart people to talk to an educated lay audience.
Yes. Interesting. So just educating the consumer at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So we get a lot of people who are in, I would say like science adjacent industries who come and just absorb what there is to learn. We've had a number of people from different, with very deep knowledge of specific biology components, I guess, come together and actually work together and collaborate because they found that they were basically studying two sides of the same coin.
Wow.
So it has been really wonderful.
Really cool. So, that's wild. Do food companies come to that?
They have. We've had people speak from Mars Corporation.
Okay. So even the big ones.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. I mean, Larry knows a lot of people.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's, that's a really interesting mission.
Yeah.
So that's like the goal of the Gold Lab is to help lay people, really?
Yep. Understand science.
Wow.
And to get scientists and lay people working together and...
For a healthier outcome.
Yes.
That's unbelievable. I love it. What do you think are the biggest challenges to that beyond the optimism of Larry?
We haven't changed the format of it really. We basically give each presenter 45 minutes, and we ask them to speak for 30 minutes and then do Q&A with the audience for 15. It ends up being 2 very long days.
Yeah.
And I think the sum of it is more than its parts. And for the virtual audience, people who sort of pop in and out, they miss that. They miss how the talks connect to each other. So I would say a challenge is sort of getting people to commit 2 full days of their lives. I mean, we get some pretty big executives coming in and they sort of want to swoop in and do a talk and leave.
Yeah.
Like, that's not the point.
Right. Yeah. Keeping them there.
Yeah.
That's hard. Do you, have you seen any change from being there for so long now?
I guess there are a few more people that want to sort of dive bomb and then leave. But the people who stay, it's like it blows their mind. They come back.
They come back.
Yeah.
Yeah. They repeat. Awesome. So you're at Gold Lab. You're still at Gold Lab,
Yep.
right? So you still have that, but you just also started Coles.
Colorado Longitudinal Study. We incubated Coles within the Gold Lab Foundation.
Okay.
We basically created the idea and the first business plan
There.
there.
And now they are technically separate entities.
Yes.
Wild. So Larry, obviously, certainly big on changing the course of healthcare. How do you see, from like your perspective, of someone that's not a scientist, but some of the marketing degree, who certainly pays attention to data and emotional decisions, like how do you think that, or not, I don't want to say your analysis, but like when you look at the macro American healthcare system / just our joke about Coloradians being skinny, like how do you see it, and have you seen it evolve?
I was incredibly lucky to be incubated in the Gold Lab Foundation and to basically have the backing of that entity when we got started with Coles. Gave me the opportunity to spend the first 2 years basically just learning. I mean, it was so fun. I wish I could also have a certificate that says, hey, you learned a lot.
Right, yeah.
But it was basically like a master's program. So I got to go visit the UK Biobank, and I went to Toronto to the Canadian Longitudinal Study on Aging. I went to Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, where they have the largest biobanks in the U.S. And I got to talk to people who created those biobanks and sort of what had they done that worked really well. I'm all about learning vicariously. Let me not repeat your mistakes, and please let me, repeat what you did well.
Right.
And like you said, like people, the higher up you go, the more generous I think people are if you're willing to ask the questions.
Right.
And you genuinely care.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's a really good caveat, is that you can't just be disingenuous about it, because they see right through it.
Right.
That's why they're in those positions.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree. So I got to learn, and from the researcher side, everyone was talking about how hard it is to get people to join and to participate, but also sort of how entrenched the sort of scientific method was in how these studies were designed. So I would say all the studies we looked at were pre-AI. They're really studying big data was very cumbersome and hard, and the data wasn't set up in such a way that it could just sort of be manipulated easily.
Consumed and analyzed.
Exactly. And it was very challenging to change protocols and even consent. So this is, I could go down a really long tangent on this, but for a very long time, there was this notion that if I consent you to participate in a study about cardiovascular disease, that is, and rightly so, the only thing you can use your samples for is cardiovascular disease. But what if people sort of just end up anecdotally seeing, hey, a lot of these people seem to be getting Alzheimer's. I wish I could go back and use those samples to study Alzheimer's. Tough luck. You can't. Ethically, you can't, because you were not consented to give data for all of that. So there are tons of resources out there that have a very...
Even if I'm dead?
Even if you're dead.
Damn.
There's a very narrowly defined window of what those samples can be used for. And it was actually the rare disease community that has championed aggressively and politically that the patient should have more control over their samples and how they're used, and that actually patients want broader use of their samples, not narrower.
So that's changing?
That is definitely changing.
Whoa.
There was something that went through the federal legislation around, it's called I just had it and I lost it. The Common Rule. So the Common Rule basically went out for public opinion, and it's this idea that can biospecimens actually be generally consented? Can you say, yes,
use it for anything?
And politicians and a lot of science researchers thought that, no, it can't be. That's too broad. People won't agree to that. But it was patient advocacy groups that said, yes, that's absolutely what should be done. So we were looking at this while we were starting up Coles, because I think Common Rule didn't actually take effect until, and it's not a law, but it's sort of a recommendation.
Yes. Okay.
Until like 2018 or something. So we were paying close attention. This will ultimately probably have implications for patients around whether or not they own their electronic medical records. So this is affecting.
Yeah, it's a domino effect.
Rippling out.
Oh, I didn't. Oh, wow. It's also related.
Yeah.
Wow. Really cool, though.
Yeah.
So that's going to change your. I mean, and then you add AI to the computing power of that.
Exactly.
Right.
I mean, it made a lot of sense. I mean, okay, so healthcare is still an area where we send off a test. If we want to get a lipid panel done at a local hospital for our participants, we get the result faxed back. Faxed. That's literally the only way they will deliver that information to us.
Holy shit.
It's absurd. Our software engineers are like, what? But that's how slow things are to change. So when you consider that large drug trials were done using paper, lots and lots of paper, if participants consented on paper, you couldn't give people control over, yes, I consent to this, no, I don't consent to this, yes, I consent to this, because there's no way that you could keep track of that on the large scale in a paper-based system.
Yeah, you could go back, yeah.
But now with technology, there's literally no excuse not to. Mm-hmm. It's so easy to just put on a filter or a sort and say, hey, these are the people that consented to this. These are the people that didn't.
Use these samples, yeah.
Those things are antiquated, and they're still done regularly because they've been done before. So this is definitely an area where it's been helpful for me, I guess I would say, to be an outsider.
Yeah.
To say there are certain things in research that shouldn't be changed, but there are lots of things that can change and need to change. It's like, I don't understand why we still use QWERTY keyboards.
Right.
Bullshit. Do you know why keyboard is QWERTY?
No.
It's because, my mom taught me this, it's because people used to type on typewriters, and when it was just A, B, C, D, E, F, G, the whole alphabet, people typed too quickly, and it jammed the keys. So I'm like,
No way.
They did QWERTY to slow people down. And so I'm like, why?
Wow. And
why are we still doing that?
It's too far. That one's too far. I can't learn to type again at 38. I don't know.
Fair enough.
I'm down with predicting my health outcomes.
Keep faxing
but
me
yeah,
my results.
no, I don't fax them. I'm with you on that. That's bullshit because that doesn't affect anyone. It's like one person who is upset about that.
Maybe.
It'd be hard to learn how to type again. That's wild. Is the rare disease community particularly invested in what you're doing? Like, do they must.
Actually, there's a lot that we can learn from the rare disease community.
That you can learn from them.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, help me with that.
So there's some really, and actually this is another place where the Gold Lab Symposium has been incredible. Larry cares very deeply about rare diseases, especially childhood diseases.
Okay.
And so every year we have at least one speaker come and talk about a rare disease. The most passionate people we've had come to speak are parents who've basically been told by a doctor that there's nothing that they can do for their child who has this deteriorating disease, potentially probably terminal. And these mama bears, they go to Washington.
Yeah.
They say this is unacceptable. And they now are using social media. So there's a local girl in Boulder, Sophie, in Sophie's neighborhood. Her parents basically, when she was diagnosed, she was one of like 5 in the whole world. And using social media, her mom is now connected with over 50 people. And that actually is better for Sophie too, because now there's 50 samples that they can actually start analyzing.
And protocols that they can live their own lives with, and someone to call when something goes awry, like a network.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there are groups. So Sharon Terry runs an incredible organization called the Genetic Alliance, and they basically do advocacy work for a number of small rare disease groups. So, it's a lot of people, when something happens, they want to start their own charity.
Yes.
You end up having a lot of redundancies and things that are sort of siloed if everyone has their own charity. Genetic Alliance works really hard so that the data that each one of those rare disease organizations collects, if they can put that into a shared biorepository, other people, other investigators can access it too. So Coles really, rather than trying to recreate the wheel, it's on us to say, hey, if somebody else has already done it better, we should be asking the Genetic Alliance how we should be organizing our data, not figuring out a whole new way and then being frustrated when the data doesn't
redo it. Yeah. Oh, I have someone I have to introduce you to.
Please.
Actually, buddy in town, Jameis Lafreniere, whose daughter is Sophie, ironically enough, Sophie's Hope Foundation. And she has a rare disease that fortunately is not terminal. I'm going to butcher it, so I'm not going to go there. But I mean, she's like from how I understand it as a layman is she has to have a perfect balance of glucose, and her body doesn't regulate it like in the opposite way of a diabetic. Wow. Like she has to have, I want to say it's cornstarch, might be corn syrup, but at like regular feedings, like every 3 or 6 hours, just to maintain the levels. And he's got a great program going. Davis is pretty involved in helping him raise money every year. Yeah, it's right in town. Awesome guy. Runs the marathon every year to raise money. Really good, really great family and really good cause. But
I think diabetes is one of those diseases that we will look back on in 20 years and say we didn't know shit.
You really?
Absolutely. I mean, type 1 used to be called juvenile diabetes. I know 3 people who've gotten juvenile diabetes in their 30s.
Yeah.
And, people, this is sort of where, if I'm going to be cynical about the pharmaceutical industry, I think there are plenty of people in the industry who are really trying to do the best they can for society.
Yes.
But with diabetes, it's kind of like dialysis for kidney disease. It's nice to have something where people don't die, but they're dependent on you for the rest of their life.
And then like when I think about what you're doing with the outcomes, like my first thought is like, what are we eating?
Oh yeah, big time.
Right? Like what are we eating? And I mean, I think you and I could probably talk about that for hours, so we'll save the people's ears, but like we're poisoning our families.
Absolutely.
And when you said the slow to change thing with the fax machine, the first thing that came to mind was the food pyramid. It's like we're telling people to suck down sugars, right, and grains, and it's like, I don't know about that. There's a lot of research out there, but we don't change that.
Well, you and I have talked sort of offline too about sort of the economics, if you will, about, hey, not nutrition companies, but food companies are able to sell us whatever they want, and they aren't at all responsible for the negative outcomes in our health.
Exactly.
Those are costs that have to get incurred in other places in our economy, and that is sort of an unsustainable model.
It's such bullshit. I mean, I'm unfortunately, I'm off Instagram now these days because I'm trying to get some time back, but I'm on Twitter, and which I don't know if that's a good thing, but like, and a lot of it is the following of that kind of stuff, and it's like the simplest things that we eat. Crazy how much they've changed over the last 20, 30 years, and how much stuff is outlawed everywhere else but here.
Oh yeah.
That's the scary thing, is that when you start to travel abroad and you go, well, you can't.
Why are Fruit Loops not neon color?
Right, it's
because it's carcinogenic.
And the same package of whatever Teddy Grahams has very different ingredients here and abroad, and it's like. And then you come to America. I mean, you get off the plane. It is shocking how much we look different.
I don't know if that was your experience after being abroad.
It was the worst. I remember being on my Razr cell phone that I turned on for the first time in 2 years after I got home. And I landed, and I call my mom or dad, I forget which one, my parents, and said, I'm back on, I'm back on American soil. Thank God. And they're like, how is it? And I'm like, it was a long flight. And I was like, I hate how fucking people talk here, and everyone's fat. I was like, what happened? What happened? But I there was a period of my time when I was in my 20s when I thought people were overweight because they were lazy. Now I don't feel that way. Now I feel like certainly we are lazier as a culture, no doubt, but we're poisoning ourselves.
Well, I don't know if you binge any Netflix documentaries about like the blue zones or anything, but
are those the places where the people live really long, right?
Many people in the community live to be 100 or
yes,
more.
Yes.
They have significantly.
I have heard about it, but I have not watched it.
Oh, you should.
Okay.
There's some really good stuff because it's basically the antithesis of the fast-paced life of compartmentalize everything, and you sit like a sloth for 12 hours a day, and then you go do 40 minutes of intense exercise.
Right.
It's like, no, if you actually like spend an hour and a half in your garden, and then you go and cook dinner with your friends, and you eat a hearty meal together, that is much more.
Living.
Yeah.
Living.
Much more. But, I have to admit, for Kohl's, we do not currently have a nutrition component to our surveys, because there's the food recall diaries, and the way that we measure how people consume calories don't work. So,
Yeah.
with
And,
data,
like,
it's shit in, shit out.
Yeah. But like also you're still going to be able to predict with biomarker. Like the standard American diet is the standard American diet. How shitty it is, right?
That's fair. There are a lot of
It
people.
almost would hurt you, I think. If I mean, maybe not. Would it hurt you if you had some data that was like pure in terms of like people were really on the ball?
No, but I think that is for sure the people that would be willing to do that and do it accurately, they sort of self-select for a bias that to me is not representative of the normal American diet.
Correct.
Like
Correct.
the people in Boulder who are studying, who are training for,
Ultras.
ultra.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, they'll do it.
Yeah.
They're not going to teach us anything about Joe Schmo who sits on his couch eating McDonald's every day.
100%. Yeah, it's a food's an interesting problem. I feel like as a parent, it's really changed my mindset on it too.
How
Food,
so?
My parents were pretty good about what we eat, and now it's like my brother was on ADHD pills, and he hated them for sure. And I think I think he's fine with me talking about it, but like. I've got a son who is off the walls, and like a perfect child for medication in the 90s. Like he fits the bill. It's like, and my wife and I have talked. It's like, there's no way I'm medicating that child. I'm gonna make sure he doesn't crank sugar and he eats and he gets his runs in before he goes to school so he can concentrate. But like, we're not gonna put him on drugs when he's 9. Like that's kind of that. So that's more of how it's affected me.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Well, and I will say as a woman who grew up in the 80s and the 90s, had plenty of body image issues. Anybody who studies nutrition and doesn't think about the emotional component of food is missing the mark.
1,000,000%.
You can't just study macro, micronutrients. It's why do people eat? Why do people overeat? When do people restrict and why? Those to me all have important implications into the health of your body and your well-being.
It definitely seems like it's a very complicated issue that, to your point, some people are taking advantage of, and I think that's what sucks.
Yeah.
I think it sucks that you have to go to the grocery store and be that educated of a consumer.
Totally.
We've got enough stuff to worry about. Like if we're gonna lean on the government for something, help us with our food.
Oh yeah.
But no, it's an interesting topic. You're someone who we're going to have to get an update from. We are. You've got the long-term data, and I think that's going to be so interesting. And are you expecting that it's going to take another 10 years? Like, how do you look at that? Like because I get, like, right now it's like, we got to nail our protocols. We got to get as much engagement from the community as we can to participate.
Well,
but you don't seem like the patient type.
What do you mean?
I don't feel like you're going to wait around 10 years.
Neither is my board. We are all chomping at the bit.
Okay.
But, we're not chomping at the bit for people to get sick.
Yes.
In the studies that I've seen, when researchers are anxious to see disease, they target much older people. They target people who are at high risk of getting a chronic disease or a heart attack or something. That doesn't teach you about the general population. So I am impatient for getting enrollment and involvement from the community. I'm unwilling to sacrifice the quality of the data that we collect for anything. But when it comes to
because ultimately that's your competitive advantage.
Exactly.
Right.
I mean, that's we're not contributing value in the research pipeline if we don't have really high quality data. And that you don't have to be a scientist to know how to collect good data.
Right.
So I can still contribute something there.
100%.
When really it's catalyzing this community to participate. And then, I think it's that, we're not going to understand the mysteries of heart disease in 2 years. But when we have tons of participants, my hope is that participants will start asking health questions.
Yes.
And saying, tell me why, the community that I grew up in Wayland, Massachusetts, where my sister in her grade, so many kids had diabetes in her grade that they started testing the well water. But it's like, what the hell were they testing for? We don't know what to test for. So I'm eager to start collecting data. I'm impatient. Well, we've already started, but I'm impatient to collect really good data.
In volume.
Yeah. But then the analysis of it, I would just call that like job security. Like,
Yeah.
I want that to be my life's mission.
And like, hopefully, I know AI today has bias, but as we work, that will hone over time. And I
Well-
feel like your application is a particularly perfect one to avoid bias.
And I apologize for
No, let it rip.
going on this tangent right at the end, but the other thing that I hear repeatedly with every single research project that I've come across, just about, unless it was focused on an underrepresented community, that basically they would have a caveat in sort of like the what are the things that could have skewed your data. It's we probably had a biased sample because the only people we could collect from were middle class white people, and that is just sort of across the board what people say. And that's because researchers who are in academia, who don't have marketing backgrounds, they have science backgrounds, and who basically think that the general lay public should be grateful to participate in research.
Right. They don't get it.
They don't get it.
Yeah.
And so basically, the fact that the first person I hired was a community engagement manager who is also fluent in Spanish, and luckily she's also fluent in French. She's wonderful. Is to say that we're prioritizing the diversity of our cohort from day one. This is not going to be an afterthought because, like you said, especially if we're trying to get AI to train models on this data, if we don't have a representative cohort, it will only increase inequity. So that is another huge point.
Yeah, that's really and I love the way you're approaching it, though. It's completely from a marketing standpoint as opposed to like what's the path of least resistance standpoint,
absolutely.
right?
I mean, when you think about marketing, it's sort of like, yes, some customers cost more to acquire. That's okay.
100%.
You pay more for those. The
Yeah.
lifetime value of that customer is higher.
I never would have considered that issue. Like just I don't know your world. It's so interesting. Thanks for sharing it with us, by the way. That is it's why you are going to have to give us an update. We're going to need some level of an update. We've got, and actually, there's another kick-ass woman CEO that's due for an update. I'm kind of thinking I might need to have like a little beers and careers symposium
Roundtable?
update,
Ooh,
a
I would
little
love
round table. So, Meredith, thank you for carving out some time on your vacation with your family to come chat with us on beers and careers, and wish you and the folks at Kohl's the best.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks again.